The Thompson family had a reputation to maintain. Old money, social connections, and impeccable taste were the pillars upon which Margaret Thompson built her identity. So when her only son David fell in love with me, a seemingly ordinary kindergarten teacher from a town no one in her circle had heard of, she made her disapproval crystal clear. "She seems nice," Margaret had said after our first meeting, the word nice carrying the weight of profound disappointment. "But honestly, David, what could you possibly have in common with someone so simple?" David defended me, of course. He loved that I was unpretentious and genuine, qualities in short supply among the social climbers he'd grown up around. But Margaret's campaign of subtle undermining continued for the 2 years we dated, reaching its peak when David proposed with his grandmother's ring. "Congratulations," Margaret had said coldly over the phone when David shared the news. "I suppose we'll need to start planning immediately. There's so much Sarah will need to learn about how things are done in our world." Our world. As if I were an alien visiting from another planet rather than someone born just 50 miles away. The wedding planning became Margaret's battlefield. Every decision, the venue, the caterer, the flowers, became an opportunity to highlight the gulf between my limited experience and the Thompson family standards. I tried to remain gracious, reminding myself that this was about marrying David, not winning his mother's approval. Then came the dress shopping expedition. Margaret had insisted we visit an exclusive bridal salon in the city where, she informed me, Thompson women had been selecting their wedding gowns for generations. The appointment had been scheduled months in advance, and Margaret had arranged for several of her closest friends to accompany us, women whose names regularly appeared in society pages and charity gala photographs. "It's tradition," she explained when I suggested keeping the shopping party smaller. "These women have known David since he was a child. Their opinion matters." What she really meant, of course, was that my opinion mattered less. The salon was exactly as intimidating as I'd expected. All crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes, with gowns displayed like museum pieces. The owner greeted Margaret with air kisses and exclamations about how long it had been since they'd seen each other. "And this must be the bride," she said, examining me with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, this is Sarah," Margaret replied. "We'll need something that flatters her figure. Perhaps something with sleeves, and nothing too fashion-forward. Something classic to elevate her natural simplicity." I bit my tongue as the salon staff measured me and discussed my challenging proportions, as if I weren't present. Margaret's friends sipped champagne and reminisced about their own wedding dresses, each apparently more exquisite than the last. After trying on 7 different gowns, each met with subtle grimaces and whispered consultations among Margaret's committee, I was exhausted and close to tears. "Perhaps we should continue another day," the salon owner suggested delicately. "Finding the perfect gown can be a process." That's when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Sarah, honey, I know you're busy with the Thompson dress shopping today, but I wanted to let you know that package we discussed arrived. It's even more beautiful than we hoped." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "That's wonderful news, Mom. I'll stop by later to see it." When I ended the call, Margaret was watching me with narrow-eyed suspicion. "A package? Something for the wedding?" she asked. "Just something my mother wanted me to see," I replied vaguely. "Speaking of which, I should probably wrap up here. Thank you all for your time and input." Margaret looked affronted. "But we haven't found anything suitable yet." "Sarah, this isn't like picking up something from a department store. A proper wedding gown requires time and consideration." "I understand," I said, summoning my kindergarten teacher patience. "And I appreciate everyone's help today. But I think I need some time to reflect on the options." 2 weeks later, Margaret called an emergency meeting at her home to discuss what she termed concerning developments with the wedding planning. David and I arrived to find her in the sunroom, surrounded by wedding magazines and sample table settings. "Sarah," she began without preamble, "I've heard disturbing rumors that you've purchased a wedding dress without proper consultation. Some off-the-rack item from a boutique in your hometown?" I took a deep breath. "I have found my dress, yes." Margaret's perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her throat. "But we haven't approved anything. The salon was preparing a selection of appropriate options for our next appointment." "I appreciate that, but I found something I love." "Well," Margaret said with forced brightness, "I'm sure it's nice. Perhaps we can have it altered by professionals to make it more suitable. Where did you find this dress? Actually, it was my mother who found it. Margaret exchanged knowing glances with her friend Beatrice, who had apparently been summoned for moral support. I see. Well, that explains a lot. I'm sure your mother meant well, but she couldn't possibly understand the standards expected at a Thompson wedding. David, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Mom, I'm sure Sarah's dress is beautiful, and ultimately, it's her decision. Of course it is, Margaret replied with a tight smile. I simply want to make sure Sarah doesn't feel uncomfortable when she's standing next to proper society brides in their photos. People notice these things. Perhaps, Beatrice suggested with fake helpfulness, we could see this dress, just to get a sense of what alterations might be needed. I hesitated, then nodded. Actually, I brought it with me today. I thought you might want to see it. Margaret's eyebrows shot up in surprise. You brought it here? Today. It's in the car. I'll go get it. When I returned carrying a garment bag, Margaret had composed herself, clearly prepared to be diplomatic about whatever fashion disaster she expected to emerge. David squeezed my hand reassuringly as I unzipped the bag. The dress that emerged was a masterpiece of understated elegance, an ivory silk column with delicate beadwork along the neckline and a supple train. Even on the hanger, it was clearly something special. What a shame your family couldn't afford something better. My future mother-in-law sneered, examining my wedding dress with obvious disappointment. Everyone will know you don't belong in our circle. I stayed silent as she continued her critique. It looks like a discount store knockoff, she declared, reaching for the collar. The beadwork is clumsy, and this silk is clearly synthetic. When she flipped the collar to check the label, her face went completely white. This is impossible. Because there, on the designer label, was a name even Margaret Thompson approached with reverence. Alessandra Ricci, the Italian designer whose creations were worn by royalty and whose waiting list was years long. There must be some mistake, she stammered. This can't be authentic. How would you possibly? It's genuine, I confirmed quietly. A gift from my godmother. Your godmother? Beatrice echoed incredulously. Who exactly is your godmother? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. David went to answer it, returning moments later with my mother and a woman Margaret clearly recognized immediately. Elena? Margaret gasped, rising to her feet. Elena Ricci? What are you doing here? The woman who entered, elegant silver-haired, dressed in simple but exquisite linen, smiled warmly. Maggie Thompson. It's been 30 years? Still intimidating young brides, I see. Some things never change. My mother stepped forward, squeezing my shoulders supportively. I believe you've been getting to know my daughter, though perhaps not as well as you thought. Margaret looked between them in growing confusion. I don't understand. How do you know Elena Ricci? Elena, the Elena Ricci, sister of Alessandra and co-founder of their fashion empire, laughed lightly. Catherine and I were roommates at university before I moved back to Milan. She was the first American to model for our early collections. Model? Margaret repeated weakly, staring at my mother, the kindergarten teacher's aide from a small town who apparently had an entirely different past than the one Margaret had assumed. Just for a few years, my mother said modestly, before I met Sarah's father and decided to move back home. But Elena and I remained close. She's Sarah's godmother, and when she heard about the wedding, I insisted on designing her dress personally, Elena finished. Catherine was like a sister during those early struggling years. Her daughter is family. Margaret sank back into her chair, speechless for perhaps the first time in her life. Her friend Beatrice was staring at my mother with newfound fascination. You're Catherine Jensen, the face of Ricci's Breakthrough '89 collection. I still have those magazine spreads. You disappeared from the fashion world so suddenly. My mother smiled. I found another calling, one that made me happier than the fashion world ever did. I felt David's arm slip around my waist as we watched his mother attempting to recalibrate everything she thought she knew. So you see, Margaret, I said gently, while I appreciate your guidance with the wedding planning, I do have some resources of my own. And more importantly, I know exactly who I am and where I come from, even if you've made some incorrect assumptions. The silence that followed was broken by Elena, who clapped her hands decisively. Shall we discuss the rest of the wedding party? I've brought some sample designs for the mother of the groom. Something that would complement Sarah's dress beautifully. Maggie, if you're interested. 2 days later, David and I were having dinner at my parents' modest but comfortable home, the home where I'd grown up, surrounded by photographs of my mother's brief but significant modeling career alongside pictures of school plays and soccer tournaments. I've never seen my mother speechless before, David marveled, helping my father grill vegetables in the backyard. She's been almost deferential since meeting your mom and Elena. My father laughed. Catherine has that effect on people when they discover her past. She never made a big deal of it. That's not her style. But she was quite something in her day. Still is. I called from the patio table where I was helping my mother set up dinner. My mother smiled. The funny thing is, Margaret and I probably would have found common ground if she'd bothered to ask rather than assume. We both left high-profile worlds to focus on family. We both value education and community. But she was so busy sizing me up for where I fit in her social hierarchy that she never saw me at all. The wedding planning shifted dramatically after what David jokingly called the dress revelation. Margaret didn't exactly become warm, but her approach changed from condescension to careful respect. She consulted rather than dictated, and occasionally even deferred to my mother's connections, which turned out to include not just Elena Ritchie but several other notable figures from her previous life. On the day of the wedding, as my mother helped me into the exquisite dress that had caused such a stir, I reflected on the unexpected gift Margaret's snobbery had delivered, the chance to bridge two parts of my family history and to claim my own identity in the process. You know, my mother said, adjusting my veil, in all my years wearing runway creations, I never felt as beautiful in a dress as I know you will today, because today you're marrying for love, not for appearance. When I walked down the aisle toward David, I passed Margaret in the front row. For once, her focus wasn't on how things looked to others or whether standards were being maintained. Instead, there were tears in her eyes as she watched her son's face light up at the sight of me. At the reception, Elena Ritchie raised a toast that perfectly captured the journey we'd all taken. To David and Sarah, and to the two families joining today. May you all discover, as I have throughout my career, that true elegance comes not from labels or pedigrees, but from authenticity, kindness, and the courage to see beyond first impressions. Margaret, seated beside Elena at the head table, actually clinked glasses with my mother at these words. Later, as David and I danced under the stars, he whispered, "You know what my favorite part of that dress is?" "What?" I asked, expecting him to comment on the exquisite beadwork or perfect fit. That underneath all its fancy pedigree, it's being worn by the down-to-earth kindergarten teacher I fell in love with. The one who knows exactly who she is, with or without designer labels. I kissed him, grateful for a partner who had seen me clearly from the beginning, something his mother was only now learning to do. 6 months after the wedding, Margaret invited my mother and me to tea at her home. The pretension that had characterized our earlier visits was noticeably absent as she led us to a sun-dappled patio rather than a formal drawing room. "I've been doing some thinking," she said, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about first impressions and hidden depths, about how we present ourselves to the world and what we choose to reveal." My mother and I exchanged surprised glances as Margaret continued. "Catherine, when we first met, I made assumptions based on your current life, never imagining your past experiences. I judged Sarah through the same limited lens." She paused, clearly finding this difficult. "The truth is, before I married into the Thompson family, my background was much closer to yours than anyone in my social circle knows. My father owned a hardware store. I worked as a sales clerk through college." This revelation stunned us both. Margaret Thompson, the arbiter of old money social standards, had reinvented herself just as thoroughly as my mother had, but in the opposite direction. When I met Philip Thompson, I was determined to fit into his world perfectly. I studied how the right people dressed, spoke, entertained. I erased every trace of my origins until I convinced even myself that I'd always belonged. She looked at me directly. "When David brought you home, Sarah, I didn't see a wonderful woman who made my son happy. I saw a reminder of everything I'd worked to distance myself from. I was terrified you might expose the fraud I sometimes still feel like." Margaret. My mother said gently, "We all create different versions of ourselves throughout our lives. There's no shame in transformation." "The shame," Margaret replied, "is in denying where we came from." in treating others as less worthy because of where we think they belong in some imaginary hierarchy. She reached across the table and, in an unprecedented gesture, covered my hand with hers. I hope you'll give me the chance to be a better mother-in-law than I've been so far, and perhaps a friend in time. As we drove home afterward, my mother and I tried to process this unexpected turn. "Do you think she's sincere?" I asked. "Yes," my mother said thoughtfully. "Recognition is a powerful thing. Sometimes people need to see themselves reflected in unexpected places before they can acknowledge their own truth. Like seeing a kindergarten teacher in an Alessandra Ricci original?" My mother laughed. "Exactly, but the dress didn't change who you are, Sarah. It just helped Margaret see past her own prejudice. And that perhaps was the greatest gift of all. Not the designer dress or the social connections, but the reminder that our true worth has nothing to do with labels, whether they're sewn into a wedding gown or attached to a family name." A year later, when I discovered I was pregnant, Margaret was among the first people we told. Her eyes filled with tears as she hugged me, a genuine embrace without concern for appearances. "This child," she said, "will have the best of all worlds. Thompson determination, Jensen creativity, and parents who know the value of authenticity." As we left her home that evening, David squeezed my hand. "Who would have thought a wedding dress could change so much?" "Not the dress," I corrected him, "the willingness to look beyond it.